This past week, I read an article about something called the Positive Lexicography Project, an undertaking that the author called a glossary of happiness. The idea behind the project is really simple. The man who's behind it, a linguist named Tom Lomas, is collecting words from languages throughout the world that provide a window into human flourishing and joy. But he's not just looking for every language's simple word for happy. That would be too easy. He's looking for words that you can't so easily translate. So he's collected words like dadiri, an Australian Aboriginal word that means a deep spiritual act of reflective listening. Or sinifin, which is Welsh for a place that one feels one ought to live. He includes the Tagalog word gigil, which I'm probably saying wrong, which gets translated as the irresistible urge to pinch or squeeze someone because they are loved or cherished. Is that right? Is that? And I love this one. Utepils is a Norwegian word for a beer that is enjoyed outside, particularly on the first hot day of the year. Why shouldn't there be a single word for that? This article has been bouncing around in me throughout the week as we approach the day of Pentecost, because today, of all the days in the church year, is a day for language. This is a day when Christians throughout the world celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension. And the way the story is told in the book of Acts, language had a big role to play. The Holy Spirit made its presence known with the sound of a thundering wind, with flames dancing on people's heads, and with words of good news bursting out of the house in every language of the world. On this day when we read that central story of Pentecost, we also read a story that the church has paired with it for centuries, a much older one that also features a plethora of languages. The Tower of Babel is one of the oldest stories in the Bible, an ancient tale that seems to be told with the aim of answering a pretty simple question. Why are there so many languages in the world? Why can't we understand one another? It's not difficult to imagine the world in which this question was posed, a world where the Hebrew people encountered other tribes in the ancient Near East and discovered quite quickly that communication was not so easy. These other tribes had different words for cattle and desert and sandals. How did this happen? This was a time when you told stories and recited poetry around the fire rather than picked up a textbook to answer the big questions. And the story they told began a long time ago, in a time when there weren't so many tribes and languages, when there was just one. In fact, it's a strange story with a nervous God who doesn't like the fact that these people on earth can communicate and cooperate and work so well together, who sees this great tower they've built and gets nervous about just what they can do with all that collective power. So God confuses their language so they won't understand one another. And the story ends with a tragic picture, with this common project of a city abandoned, and the single community of people now dispersed throughout the earth and no longer able to communicate with one another. The story aims to answer that simple question of why there are so many languages in the world, and the answer it gives is that all those languages are actually a form of punishment. They're a sign that something is broken in the world and in human society. Fast forward now to the city of Jerusalem in about the year 30, just a few weeks after Jesus' death and resurrection. It's the Jewish festival of Shavuot, or Pentecost, the day commemorating God giving the 10 Commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai. The city is crowded with pilgrims, people who have traveled from all over the place to celebrate, and this curse of Babel is on fine display in the crowd, with people speaking any number of languages. It's that kind of boisterous, multilingual crowd that's filling the streets in Jerusalem. When word starts making its way through the crowd that something very strange is happening in the house up there on the corner. Yeah, it's a house full of people from Galilee, that farm country up north. But listen to the sounds coming out of the windows. If you listen carefully, you can hear your own language. I know it's strange. There's no reason that bunch of fishermen should be able to speak Pamphylian, but they do, and every other language besides. Just listen. Something very strange is going on up there. These are two stories about language. Yeah, but more than that, they are about difference, about the diversity of human communities. And specifically, they're about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. The Tower of Babel story pretty clearly sees difference as a bad thing, as punishment, as something to be mourned. Things might have been different, this story says. Humans might have held on to a single language and a single community. Things might have been better. But the Pentecost story really sees things differently. Here, the abundance of languages is actually the work of the Spirit. Here, difference is something to be honored and even to be celebrated. The story didn't have to go that way, you know. When the Holy Spirit showed up, it could have come speaking a single magical language that everybody in the world could understand. It could have brought back that mysterious tongue that everybody spoke back before the Tower of Babel and demanded that everybody speak that way. But that's not how it happened. The Spirit showed up speaking in every language of the world, in the many languages that people speak and understand and love. Both stories speak to that same world, where differences exist. The question is just whether those differences divide us or unite us. And that, of course, then leaves us with the question, where is the world in all of this, and where are we, the church? While we are probably more conscious of the differences and diversity of human life than ever before, I'm afraid I see lots more of the Babel view of things around us today. Difference is often seen as something to be feared, something to be guarded against. We see this in the way huge numbers of refugees are being treated today, turned away by one country after another, left on the fringes of communities if and when they do find a place. We see this in the xenophobic, nationalistic language common in many places. They're not like us. They don't belong here. Who knows what baggage they will bring? We see this in communities and individuals closing themselves off, keeping to themselves, doing their best to stay isolated. Of course, there are exceptions, but that ancient story of Babel, with its suspicion of differences, its tone of mistrust and fear, still rings pretty true, all these millennia later. But if we take the Pentecost story seriously, the church is meant to be about something else. The church, this gathering of ordinary people who are empowered by that same Spirit that showed up in a dazzling chorus of sounds. The church is meant to be about something else, about honoring our differences and seeking understanding in the midst of them. I wrote a question on our church's Facebook page this last week asking where you see the Holy Spirit at work today. And Wendy shared a beautiful story from Alberta, Canada. You have probably all heard about the wildfire that tore through the town of Fort McMurray a few weeks ago, forcing residents to evacuate. Many lost homes and livelihoods and are facing the bewildering challenge of rebuilding lives from scratch. And when some of the Syrian refugees who have been recently settled in Alberta heard the news and read the stories of these people left with nothing, they wanted to help. For many of them, it wasn't so long ago that they had been in a similar situation. So they've been organizing aid for victims of the wildfire. In Calgary, some refugees have been offering to donate the furniture that they themselves had recently received as part of their settlement. Many Syrian families have made financial contributions. One young mother said it this way: "We understand what they're feeling. When you lose everything, you have to start from zero. You lose your memories, your items. It's not easy. It's something very sad, and we can totally understand their feeling." That's what the work of the Spirit looks like, bridging differences with understanding and with grace. We will be receiving new members into our community in just a few moments. And I hope you noticed that when we read the Pentecost story from Acts a little bit ago, many of them offered a verse or two in their native languages. In Tagalog, Portuguese, Turkish, German, Oshikwanyama, and Polish, in case you're keeping track. I know we live in Geneva and we get really used to this kind of thing. So used to it that it becomes absolutely normal. But folks, this really is something amazing. It's amazing that when we come to worship, we can look around the room and see what the Holy Spirit has been up to for 2,000 years, spreading the good news to the ends of the earth, gathering people from different countries and cultures and walks of life. It's amazing that in this gathering of people around you, we know many different names for God, many different words for faith and for hope and for love, and all of them are precious. All of them can help us glimpse something of the life we find in Jesus Christ. It's amazing that in this gathering of people, we have many different songs, many different rhythms, many different ways to sing God's praise. It's amazing that we get to be part of this diverse gathering of people drawn and held together by the Spirit. Of course, we get it wrong sometimes. We stumble and step on one another's toes and mispronounce the words to one another's songs. But we get to be part of this gathering all the same. And in a world that too often sees difference as something to be feared, this is a precious experience, and one that needs to be shared far beyond the walls of this room. The beginning of the Spirit's work is a cross-cultural encounter, after all. It is simple fishermen forming strange words in their mouths, speaking words of God's love in somebody else's language. Friends, this is holy ground. This is the work of the Spirit. What a joy to be drawn into it together. Amen.